ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and if you've been following along with us this COVID season, you notice we've been doing a series of shows with the Beverly City Councilors about the state of the city. And this evening, we're stepping up the game a little bit, and we have invited our state representative, Jerry Parisella, to talk to us about the state of the state. How you doing, Jerry?
I'm doing well, thanks. It's a little odd to be doing this over Zoom and not in the studio, but great to see you.
Yeah, and get right into it. What's your take on what's going on in the big city in Boston?
I mean, it's obviously this is unprecedented times. You know, back in February, I think we had about 17,000 people file for unemployment claims, and then in the height of the pandemic, we were up to 1 million people. So just just a couple months later. So just unprecedented times financially, and for many folks, losing their jobs, whether in the restaurant business, hospitality, things like that. The unemployment rate was up to about 17%. It's back under 10% now, so things are getting a little bit better, but it's still difficult times. And it's estimated that our budget will probably be about $3 billion in deficit. At one point, they were talking about maybe $6 billion. So it's not good, but it's a lot better than it could have been.
Well, what's the plan to get everybody back to work? Is there anybody working on improvement of the situation?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's been a lot of, first of all, trying to just get folks who were unemployed help with their unemployment assistance. I mean, I got probably more calls and emails about that than anything else. Just it was so overwhelmed that people were having a hard time getting through. So that was a lot of focus on trying to get folks the unemployment assistance that they needed. Now it's, like you said, time to get folks back to work. There were some things that we tried to do in the restaurant business, for example, allowing them to sell beer and wine to go, things like that they weren't allowed to do before. Making, providing grants for PPE for folks in the hospitals, for restaurant workers, things like that, helping, businesses overcome the challenges that they faced, trying to reopen. And recently we passed a large economic development bill that would provide grants to restaurants, provide money to cities and towns. And also, I think importantly too, for like local governments, is we're trying to keep the same amount of local aid that we gave them last year, so that there won't be layoffs, municipal government, and also providing, enough adequate funds for the schools. They've got a lot of extra money that they've had to pay for protective equipment for the teachers, cleaning up the schools, things like that. Also, part of that economic development bill was legalizing sports gaming. So I thought that would be a way. People are doing it anyway. And, we've got our neighbors in New Hampshire and Rhode Island that are allowing sports gaming. So I figured that was a way to bring revenue to the state. And part of that revenue would go to a restaurant relief fund to help the workers in the restaurant industry and the restaurant owners. It hasn't become law yet because the Senate didn't take up the same bill that we did, so it's in conference committee now. So hopefully that'll happen. I heard the New Hampshire governor say that in New Hampshire there was like $100,000 in betting just on Chinese table tennis. So I mean, people are anxious to get out there and gamble with the NFL going on and things like that. We could take advantage of that situation. I'm hoping that'll happen.
Well, that was one of the comments that showed up in the Globe recently, that the new budget wasn't going to have as much aid support in it as previous. How's that working out? Is just borrowing the money to compensate, or what?
No, I mean, luckily, because of when we were doing really well financially statewide, for the budgets, we did put money into the rainy day fund. So, we'll take some of that money out. There was like $3.5 billion in the rainy day fund. So we'll be able to take some money out of that to help cover the shortfall. Obviously we'd love to get some more federal support, hoping for that. We have gotten some money already from the federal government, so that'll help. About 40% of the state budget has to do with medical costs like Medicaid. So there has been some increased reimbursements to the state for the increased costs of COVID care and things like that. So that's helped a bit. As you know, in the state budget, we have to have a balanced budget. It's required under the Constitution, so we can't just overspend like the federal government does. So it has to be a balanced budget. So I think we are going to keep the local aid the same. There likely will have to be cuts in other areas of government, but we've told the cities and towns that we're going to try to keep the local aid similar to last year.
Yeah, one of the other issues that showed up in the Globe this morning, as a matter of fact, was the conflict between the governor and the legislature over how to come up with a new police bill. And this has been kicked around quite a bit. We did a show with the local chief of police here in Beverly, and he was in favor of at least one of the important issues of having a statewide certification of police officers, because one of the concerns he expressed was the cop turns out to not to be the kind of guy you want in a blue uniform or lady, and gets sent home. And next thing you know, they're working in some other municipality. So that was one of the things they were looking for. The issue keeps coming up of what's going on with the state police. About every other week, there's an article about, guess what we found now, kind of thing. So, I mean, these seem to be areas that demand some attention, and having the governor and the legislator pointing fingers doesn't sound too good. What's the resolution of it? How do we get something to happen?
Well, we did do a police reform bill. It was passed in the House. The Senate did a separate version, so it's in a conference committee. The reason, and sort of like just what the chief said, that was one of the reasons that I supported the bill, was I thought that there should be uniform standards for all police throughout the Commonwealth. So if you're a police officer in Beverly or Boston or Berkeley out in the West, I mean, you should all have the same sort of training and standards, and it does create that oversight commission. If there is misconduct, then they could be decertified and essentially fired from their job. And there would be specific things that, not only would there be, sort of a general misconduct, but there'd be specific things that they'd be prohibited from doing, which are fireable offenses, and they should be, like lying under oath, lying in a police report, filing false, overtime statements, things like that the state police were bagged for. So I think, we're sort of on the same page with that stuff. I think there's a few issues that are probably a little more contentious about the qualified immunity issue for police. What we did in the House is we said that if a police officer was decertified, which means they're fired for misconduct, then they'd lose their qualified immunity. So that seemed to be fair, as long as they're doing their job properly. They wouldn't be personally liable for acting within the scope of the law. People misunderstand that you can still sue the police or the community for misconduct. The family of Breonna Taylor got $12 million. So that can still happen under the current law. But the police officers are concerned that if it's just totally wiped out, that they'd be hamstrung on performing their job. So I think that's one issue that has to be hashed out. I think the governor has the authority under the current law to fire state police for misconduct. It's happened before, and he can do that. But I think there have to be some sort of uniform standards, I believe, for police conduct and training, and that's part of the police reform bill that we passed. One other thing that we did in our bill would allow the governor to hire the colonel of the state police, the top commander, outside of the state police. Currently, he's not allowed to do that. He has to pick somebody from within the ranks of the state police. So this would allow him to go outside the ranks of the state police to hire the colonel or the commandant of the state police. I think that could be an important issue that might help, bring someone in from the outside.
Well, one of the things that surprised me was when they had the incident in Minneapolis. They kicked it back and forth in the press, and the mayor of Minneapolis was complaining that he couldn't fire police officers for misconduct because of the unions. And it turns out, I think, that he's the guy that negotiates the contract with the unions. So I think there's got to be some sort of transparency where people outside of the mayor and the local union have some idea of what are we agreeing to and who's got control of what. One of the things that we brought up with the local chief in Beverly, John Lavashore, was can you hire and fire police? And he says he can. So at least you have an idea of who's in charge and who's going to be responsible for the actions. And I think another one of the issues that came up that surprised me was the incident again in Minneapolis where a policeman was kneeling on the neck of George, and eventually, and eventually it killed him or hastened his death. That's one of the approved moves, and the question about the chokehold gets to be a little bit contentious because again, that's one of the approved moves in order to control somebody who is being a little too rambunctious, let's say. So I think that's not, instead of just passing a bill and saying, well, okay, we did it, and wash our hands of this one and move on to the next one, I think there needs to be a lot of discussion between the administration and the politicians that create the bill and what's really in it. What should you, as a citizen, expect if you have an encounter with the local police?
Well, specifically about chokeholds, those would be banned under the law that we passed, or the bill that we passed. And that was done in conjunction with talking to the police about that. They agree that's fine. Let's prohibit chokeholds. So there's been a lot of discussion with the police, police chiefs, administration, and others trying to craft that bill.
Yeah. Another issue that comes up, I guess, is one that rings my bell is this TCI, which is essentially a carbon tax. And it's initially implied that it's just going to be on gasoline and diesel oil, so that the motivation is to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is another questionable process. But anyway, where does this stand in the state? I guess both the House and the Senate have passed some sort of TCI bill. That in conference committee too?
Well, I mean, this TCI is a little bit different than what the House and Senate have passed. I mean, that's sort of, TCI is an agreement that the governor is trying to negotiate with like 12 other states in the region. We did pass a climate bill in the House, which would attempt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 to almost net zero. At the end of the day, something's got to be done. I know you said you're a little skeptical about it, but I mean, Harvard did a study and they determined that just reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 25% would save about $11 billion in healthcare costs over 10 years, reduce deaths by about 1,100 people, and reduced asthma cases by over 5,000. So, I mean, there's not only issues with the climate change and how that affects the globe, but also, it has economic impacts, rising tides. Beverly's a seaside community. Having more flooding, it seems to happen around seaside communities, healthcare costs. If you remember the old Salem power plant, burned coal, and there was a lot of respiratory issues around that. And now that it's been torn down and burned to cleaner gas, there seems to be less respiratory issues with that. So something has to be done for sure. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is encourage, renewables, solar, wind, hydro. But one thing that I think is important too, it doesn't get talked about a lot, is what we've done is given UMass some money to study battery storage, because we need to store that wind and solar power. Obviously the sun's not out at night, and if it's not windy, we're not generating electricity from the wind turbines. So how do we store that electricity when it's really sunny and the wind's blowing? So that's something that we're working on. And then that stored power can get back into the grid, during peak times in the summer, or help supplement the grid. So, something has to be done. There's no question that I think global warming is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Well, that's where I get off the bus to Saskatchewan. But I don't believe that something's got to be done. I think a lot of this stuff is way overblown, but that's another story for another show. And I can wait, spend a whole half hour on why CAGW, or concocted Al Gore warming, is a hoax. But anyway, I'm not going to convince you differently yet, but I'm going to work on it. The issue, I think, that another one comes up is that we're trying to get people back to work, and one of the concerns is that a lot of the people who are seriously impacted with the COVID are in the service industry, and they're not making a heck of a lot of money to start with, and I seriously doubt they've got a nest egg that they can lean back on and weather the storm. So part of the issue, I think, comes down to is the economy in general is going to change. Massachusetts is in a great position as far as the biotech industry is going, and it's doing pretty good in the straight computer business, although Wang is no longer in existence, and a few more companies have passed away, going to the West Coast. But I think there's not enough emphasis in the school systems on STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think there needs to be a stronger emphasis from the state level to get more people into jobs that pay well, so that they have the ability to build up a nest egg. What can the state do? How much can they control the curriculum at the school level?
Well, the local folks don't really like it when we're trying to tell them what to teach folks, but I think there is an emphasis on the STEM. And some even say STEAM, including the arts in that as well. Yeah. But, like I said, so when I got into office, Beverly got about $7 million for Chapter 70 money for the schools. And last year they got $9.2 million. So every year it's gone up. And, we're trying to, provide adequate funding. The Student Opportunity Act was passed last year, which would put about $1.5 billion additional funding into the schools over the next 7 years. Obviously, with this pandemic, that's taken a hit to our state budget, so it might be a little bit tough to do that in the next couple of years. But, important schools, just like, North Shore Tech, right? I mean, that place is bursting at the seams. They have probably 5 times more applications than they have seats, and, that's a fairly new school. So I think we're looking at innovative ways to utilize that facility. What Peabody is looking to do is have their kids go to Peabody High half the day and then go to North Shore Tech the other half of the day. So to try to fit the kids into the schedule there. I think that's a great idea. Something like trying to utilize that, that they're teaching some of those STEM subjects at North Shore Tech, Beverly High, trying to increase that. So I know, I agree it's really important to focus on those issues, but not everybody wants to get into that. So there is, talk of, in the service industry, it did take a huge hit. Can we provide funding for retraining for those workers? That's something that we're looking at doing. But at the end of the day, there has to be something done about COVID, and obviously there's been a lot of effort on trying to get a vaccine. Hopefully that can happen soon, because without that, it's going to be tough. We're still going to have limitations on how many people can dine indoors. Are we going to see people at Patriots games, at Bruins games, at Celtics games, all those things, at concerts? The Port Cabot hasn't been able to open because of this, and that's such an important part of our downtown, economy. So at the end of the day, getting some sort of a vaccine for COVID, I think, is going to be key.
Yeah, this is going to be a long-term process. And you think about some of the other flu epidemics we've had in the past, the swine flu, the SARS, the first one. COVID is essentially SARS-2. The avian flu, they're all still in the system. And one of the things that I keep getting reminded of by the VA is you got to get the high load vaccine, because there's all these other variations of flu that are around there, and the vaccine can be too finely focused and it doesn't do you any good. So this is going to be a long-term process, and it's not going to be a quick, okay, everybody gets the new vaccine and we're all good, we can go back to business as usual. It's going to be an annual affair, and if you look at the data, and you can see that the deaths are starting to come back, unfortunately. I can see it in the data that they put in the Salem News every day. It's starting to peak up. So it's going to be with us. So it's not something that we can walk away from very quickly.
No, for sure. Unfortunately, it's tough. The governor's making hard decisions about, limiting gatherings, and that's got some people upset. But at the end of the day, I think he's trying to do the best he can to resolve a situation that's really unprecedented. And with the flu season coming and COVID still, raging out there, it could be a tough winter.
One of the impressive things I saw recently is Hong Kong has a slightly different approach to treating COVID. As soon as somebody has any indication they've got COVID, into the hospital they go for two reasons. One is to keep it from getting worse. The second, prevent them from spreading it. And the fatality rate in Hong Kong is much better than any place else in the world, at least according to this report. So I think one of the issues that comes up is what's the state going to do to keep working at the hospital level to get more people in quicker so that they can cure them quicker and avoid spreading the disease. Is anything at the state level working about supporting hospitals besides PPE?
Well, if you recall, like in the early days of this, they set up hospital at the World Trade Center in Boston, and some other, in Worcester, they set up a field hospital, and the National Guard and others were involved. The numbers were lower in the summer, but as they start to pick up here in the fall and in the winter, that may have to happen again to help out, if those numbers really balloon. My brother's a nurse at Beverly Hospital, and, he got switched from his job doing, post-surgery recovery to working in the CCU handling COVID patients. And it was really tough in the spring. But the numbers are better right now, but if they do pick up, then all hands on deck again to resolve this. it's ironic, the hospitals were busy with COVID patients, but they were losing money because they couldn't do elective surgery.
Yeah.
And that's where they make all their money. The hospitals were hit pretty hard too. Sort of ironic. You'd think they'd be really busy because of the COVID situation, but other than that, people were afraid to go there, and all these surgeries were postponed. They're starting to get back, but we'll see what happens in the fall and the winter if those numbers pick up, if they have to stop that again.
Well, Jerry, we've come to the half-hour mark, and Kim will get very excited with me if I run over. So,
all right.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I got to find the record button and stop this thing. Here we go. And I hope we can do this again sometime in the near future, because there's going to be an awful lot to talk about. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the state level that I think everybody should get involved with. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And stay tuned. We'll be doing some more.
Thank you.
We're off. We're clean.
Ready. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate you stopping by.
Hopefully I'll see you at the Y one of these days. I haven't been back yet, but we'll see what happens.
I've been going back for 2 weeks now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And my problem is I'm still recovering from shoulder surgery in November. And with the Y out of commission for so long, atrophy sets in, and I can't do the things I used to do. But as I explained to people, the good part about it is that I don't have to be ready for Sunday's game anymore.
Yeah.
So how's the world treating you otherwise?
Yeah, it's going well. It's interesting. My daughter's in high school, so she's doing the hybrid model. So,
Yeah.
it seems to be working out okay.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah. I was a little worried about how that would work out, but it seems to be working out okay.
Yeah.
So,
And my big kick is getting more STEM education in the school system.
yeah.
And
It can be a challenge hiring teachers, that are in that field, because, if you're an engineer, you're probably making a heck of a lot more money working out there, not in the schools, so,
Yeah.
that can be a challenge.
well, one of the ironic things is, excuse me, I went looking for a job as a STEM teacher, and went online and find out who's hiring. Nobody's hiring STEM teachers within 500 miles of Beverly. So one of my bitches is that, hey, everybody talks about STEM and STEAM and streams and all the variations on it. And nobody's doing anything about it. And the last time I talked to the superintendent, there was only one art teacher for the middle school, and we're going to have a STEAM program with one art teacher and 1,300 kids. And there is no STEM certified teacher in the entire district at junior high school to high school level. And yet people are trying to do it, and I wish them luck, but like you say, if somebody's got an engineering degree, they ain't that kind of money. And that's the other issue that comes up is the teachers are trying to be very communistic. Everybody treated the same salary. Depends on years of service and how many degrees you got.
Yeah.
But yet there is a demand for people with certain skills, and they're not willing to pay or allow the system to pay more for certain skills. And as a result, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, Zoom will cut us off shortly. And
Alrighty.
And again, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us.
Alrighty. Take care, George.